Today I'm going to go over a few items regarding our GP-40, which is an etched brass model, and it is available in the kit form. Just to highlight a few items about this kit and how to go about assembling. It does require a significant amount of skill and experience in building brass models, and it helps to have some of the right tools to do this correctly. And I will first start out by saying that when this kit comes to you, we have gone to the trouble of trimming all the excess brass. And as you can see with this panel with the sides and the roofs, it's etched in one large piece. And when we're done with all the little parts and we trim these for you, they're basically ready to start soldering them together or doing any other work prior to putting accessories on the model. We trim these on the shear so we get nice, clean, straight cuts. And what you're seeing on the shear presently is the initial assembly of parts. And I usually start out by using resistance soldering and soldering up the main body and getting it nice and square. Hopefully no solder shows through on the joints. It's mainly on the inside. Second, I'll solder up the cab. And the reason I do these two parts initially is I want to start seeing my reference points and to where these are actually going to be soldered together and where the floor of the locomotive will actually reside and how to finish out all the platforms around the body of the locomotive. In putting together the cab, it's very important to try to make it as square as possible, and my techniques mainly end up being able to clamp and put spot solder welds before really soldering the joint completely, and then this gives me a pretty good stability and squareness in getting this correct the first time. On these pieces, there's a lot of knockouts to be done. I generally do those all at once without stopping. It is a little bit tedious, but it's a necessary part of building brass models sometimes, especially when they're etched. It's handy to have a reference model available. I have a couple of GP-40s already to look at, so when you start adding parts, you get them positioned correctly, and the bends that you have to make on the ends or the roofs, it's easier to have that reference and do it right the first time. Most of the knockouts, what I do is I just drill some holes and with a small cutting wheel start cutting out the excess material, and then filing down to the window frames here and using a rat tail file, fine one, do the corners. So that's pretty much the beginning stages of building the GP-40. Some of the line work that you would see that you would have to develop with some additional brass, I will have and demonstrate that in another video and stitch that together with this video. We're back in the shop, and I want to continue our discussion on assembling the GP-40 brass kit. And previously I talked a little bit about the cab and the main body. The next step I'd like to do is solder the body to the back of the cab. But before I did that, I want to first work a little bit on the brass floor, and starting to do that, I created a pattern that would be used to scribe onto the floor what the front of that floor should look like and the back on the locomotive. It's easier to work on the floor before you solder it to the body. On my reference piece, since we ship just a plain sheet of brass, what you would do would be to take that pattern, put it on the end, and scribe. I like to use a needle, and then cut that shape before you do any soldering of parts or the floor to the body. Once you solder the body to the back of the cab, you'll also find it easier to determine the length of your floor, because we give it a little, we make it strong in terms of length so that there's excess material to work with. And once you determine the length, you would want to go ahead and again cut that pattern on the back of the floor, presumably before you solder the floor to the body. There's probably 10 different ways to skin a cat here. Every model builder has their process, means, and methods. So the way I normally go about things isn't necessarily how you would do this. It's only suggestive. We'll pick this up a little further down the road. Just wanted to note also that once the floor is soldered to the body, there's going to be some flooring along this edge, approximately this length. And you can take a look at the prototype or a comparable GP-40 model and see that there's back steps on the back door on the other side, and it'll all come together, and there may be some additional brass work you're going to have to do and some soldering, but I think that's all the enjoyment of working in brass and building from scratch. In order to hasten this along a little faster for this project for demonstration purposes, I would normally have decided at this point if I'm going to make this a dummy locomotive or power it. And if I did, I'd probably start making my cuts in the floor here on the locomotive for accommodating all the detail and the trucks and how I would be mounting the trucks to bolsters. And in the kit, I try to provide some bolster platforms for possible use in this model, particularly as a dummy engine. And so before I would solder it to the body, I probably would have made all those cuts that I wanted to, similar to how some of the locomotives were done by Central Locomotive Works years ago in their kits, or if you look at some of the plastic models like this MTH, there is no floor on this, so I have to customize a floor and build the pilots and bring that engine to a stage where it's operational on a layout. Now on this particular locomotive, the next thing I'm going to be looking at is doing the trim along the floor on each side, putting in the steps front and back. Normally the floor plane is going to be across here, although I notice on this locomotive on the front it's going to come down just slightly, not enough so that you would notice it, but from a scale perspective, everything seems to be in line with a standard GP-40 body. So there's always a lot of work to do, and again, no one's procedure is necessarily perfect. So I would suggest that if you find a better means of constructing this, go for it. So with any scratch building project, some things you're just going to have to make from scratch using brass. And today I want to show you that on a GP-40, on the left-hand side of the engine is a raised platform off the floor. I guess this makes it easier to open the cabinetry to access the engine internals for servicing. So in any event, I decided to create that particular platform with brass, and it will be soldered onto the deck of the floor. And the way I do this is I'll take a piece of brass and measure the width of the floor platform, which is approximately 7/16, and I put this piece of brass and bend it. I cut it to length first, and then on the end there's a little fascia step here, and then this would get placed behind the cab on top of the floor and soldered in place. And the distance or the thickness of this platform is sort of regulated by the bottom of the cabinet doors. With any scratch building, brass project, or even a kit in brass, there will be some things that you'll need to fabricate and add to the model. It's part of scratch building. You'll note on the GP-40 on the left side of the engine, there is a raised platform along this wall of the engine body, and it steps down approximately 3/4 of the way back. And I believe this platform is there for servicing the engine, opening up the cabinetry to get to the internals. So what I did was fabricate this in brass and solder it to the floor. The depth or thickness of this platform is regulated by the bottom line of where the cabinet doors fall, so it would be slightly below that. So as you can see on my engine, I have a piece in here, and this particular piece of brass was pretty heavy. It was of the same material as the floor itself, and in order to get a good bend, I did a little annealing of the brass before I bent it so it'd soften it up a little bit. But on thicker brass, you're going to have more of a chamfer roundness, and so it may behoove you to go to a slightly thinner piece of brass and get a much more sharper corner here. And when I put this in and bent it, I then trimmed both edges and regulated my depth and the width of this piece, which is approximately 7/16, and then soldered it in place. So the trim that will go right below this later on will also be pre-drilled for stanchions or marked where we would want to solder in stanchions for hand railings. So step by step the model develops, and you'll also note that on this piece here there will be a little fascia or drop down, and I generally cut out the corner and I will go forward and just score where I want the bend to be, and I get a nice clean step and just put a little solder on that as well. The next step was to develop the roof for the GP-40. Typically, what I was thinking was I was just going to take a piece of brass, cut it to size, and then do 45-degree bends. But I changed my mind and decided to take the same piece of brass and simply cut the sides, the top, and the other side, and I'm just going to solder them up and get a nice clean line instead of a bend line. So that approach, I think, is going to make the model look better. The roof piece here has line work that's approximately a 25-degree angle, and will accommodate underneath that the headlights, for the engine. So that's what we're going to do on the roof. As we progress through this project, the next step I took was to mount the nose to the floor of the engine. This particular piece is not brass. I created it in the CAD program and 3D printed that piece using PETG. The color is called Froggy Gold. The profile or angle of the nose, I made the angle strong. And earlier today, I took this and I decided that I want less of an angle, so I put it up against a belt sander and gently changed the angle or slope of this. And it turned out really well. It gave me a little more flexibility to get the piece to the point where I wanted in comparison to some of my reference models that were done in brass. I made this nose piece thick enough on all the walls and the top to be able to also sand a little bit off and change the angle to exactly what I wanted. And I decided to be able to mount the nose to the floor using 4 256 screws. I used a clearance bit on the brass and a tap bit into the plastic, and they worked out real well. These are flathead screws that are 1/4 inch long, and I think these screws on the forward edge here, I may use dual purpose, perhaps mounting the pilot, but we'll see. Eventually, I want to maybe change this model and make it so the floor comes entirely off the model for servicing. So that gives you a little idea of the progress we're making. When I go to solder the steps here and on the back, I will remove this, even though I'm using resistance soldering and I probably won't touch or melt the plastic. I think I will play it safe. So that's how I went about this. Some of the other pieces I need to install would be the number boards up here. We'll do that a little later. Our next step will be to work on the rear end of the engine. And on that particular side, and the reason I did not do anything on the end of the engine in terms of using my template to cut, I want to see where my back end ends here. And what I'll do is I'll just take this over to my shear once I figure out the distance that I want, cut it, and then cut in my angles. We'll catch you in the next clip. Just a short update on our progress building the GP-40 reference model, and wanted to talk a little bit about what we did on the back end of the body. And this shows you that we did add some detail parts. We soldered on to the roof some of the brass rivet detail. We cemented on some of our 3D printed detail. But on the tail end, we worked to form our back end. And if you may recall, one of the pieces for the back end is flat. There's no angle to it. So as a brass modeler, what I typically do was to determine the angle for the back end, which is approximately 25 degrees. And we cut our shape in here so we could solder this piece onto the body. An easy way to get this bend and get it nice and clean is to find exactly the center line. And I take the Dremel with a little cutting disc, and on the back side, just score it lightly in a very straight line, center line. And then we do the bend, and it forms very nicely, a very clean bend, and then was ready to solder on. Now, in the future video, this floor is going to come off the model, and we're going to develop the power for this engine. Probably a Pitman motor with the trucks and double drive shaft, so each truck is powered, and we'll make the appropriate cuts in the floor here. And I'm going to make this floor so everything just drops in place. It's easy to service rather than hard soldering everything, which prevents you from doing any service on the internals. So this is right now for show and tell, and this gives the modeler a good idea on how to proceed, at least with putting together the body. Hope you enjoyed these videos, and we like to hear your suggestions where we can improve, and if we haven't got things quite to scale, we will try to remediate that, but I think we're pretty close. And I do like working in brass, and it's always been my favorite media to work in. And so I look forward to completing this reference model as I find the time to add on such things as the steps on the front here and on the back, and just keep improving it little by little. It's a very enjoyable project. We'll catch you later.